Hi, this is Cheryl Gallant, your Conservative Member of Parliament for the fall foliage-filled riding of Renfrew-Nipissing-Pembroke. It's helpful to recognize when a divisive tactic is being used on you by the government. It helps us differentiate misinformation from reality. We've talked about accusation in the mirror, an all-time favorite of the Prime Minister. It's when he accuses someone else of doing exactly what he is doing, like accusing Conservatives of being unsupportive of people under attack in Ukraine when it is Trudeau who refuses to send the equipment to them when it's needed. He announces what he's going to do, but he never follows through. His front bench and the rest of his MPs simply repeat the false statements fed to them. The other weapon we see Trudeau drawing from his holster is whataboutism. He uses it when he's being caught in one of his many lies. This weapon was unsheathed during his testimony at the Hogue inquiry, when it was confirmed he knew about foreign interference into previous elections, but did nothing because it worked in his favor. He blustered something about other parties doing the same type of thing, as though that would exonerate him for doing nothing to stop foreign agents from threatening candidates from other parties. Deny, deflect, deceive, and accuse others of the same thing to make their corruption seem acceptable. All the Liberal Party and even the NDP chirp about the same thing. The corruption in this government has reached monumental levels. You may remember the missing $40 million from the sponsorship scandal, ad scam, back around the turn of the millennium. The corruption is subject to inflation too. The Liberals' green slush fund corruption increased tenfold over ad scam to $400 million missing dollars. The Liberal minions behind the front benches don't question the missing millions. They keep their mouths zipped in hopes that one day it'll be their turn to be on the front bench and feather their nests with some new scheme. Justin Trudeau tried to brag about banning firearms from law-abiding firearms owners, the very guns his personal protective detail stands armed with to save his life, while continuing to ignore the crime wave he has unleashed across the country. As a result, the Toronto Police Association had to fact-check him and point out that shootings are up 45% and gun-related homicides are up 62% in Toronto over just the last year. Violent gun crime is up 116% under Justin Trudeau after falling significantly under the previous government, the Conservatives. This ban isn't about handguns or so-called assault-style firearms. This is about the Liberals taking the next step in their plan to confiscate Grandma's hunting rifle. The Liberals are making life more carefree for violent criminals by repealing mandatory minimum sentences for gun crimes with Bill C-5, making it easier to get bail with C-75, and failing to stop the flow of illegal guns across the border. Conservatives will stop the crime and bring home safe communities for Canadians. Last week, I mentioned how more Canadians had learned about a radical far-left Liberals pandemic bill. Dalhousie, a professor and popular podcaster, the food professor, had written an article about the dangers he saw in the new proposed law. The one point I took issue with was that the professor claimed the bill would force Canadians to become vegan. The bill won't force you to become vegan. The bill will force you to choose between becoming a vegan or eating crickets. Now, the far left pushing this radical bill is upset that people are getting wise to his agenda. The far left radical liberal went after me and the food professor in a video he recently shared on social media. That video is a master's class in political propaganda. He starts with a little character assassination on a private citizen who dared to question a liberal. He does this using classic guilt by association. When someone doesn't have a good counter-argument, they try to discredit their opponent rather than discredit their policy. He claims the food professor's criticism that the bill would significantly expand the governmental powers in response to future pandemics, forcing everyone to eat vegetables, is false. He claims the bill would do no such thing, and anyone who believes that is in the pocket of the meat lobbyists. He then goes on to explain how his bill would expand government powers in preparation for the next pandemic. Take a look.
Because a Dalhousie professor, known for defending big grocers amidst record food inflation and who believes the woke movement is influencing our food policies, well, he describes Bill C-293 as a major, major threat. He writes that it has the potential to significantly expand governmental powers in response to future pandemics and warns that it could lead to government mandating the consumption of vegetable proteins. These are dangerous times if you believe the dark corners of the internet or meat lobbyists. Of course, I know it doesn't do these things because I wrote the damn bill. It doesn't grant any new governmental authorities at all. And don't worry, Aunt Kim, it won't force anyone to eat vegetables. Instead, the bill requires the government to develop a plan to prepare for and to take steps to reduce the risk of a future pandemic.
What the MP did was to take the reasonable criticism of the bill and match it with an unreasonable criticism that no one is actually making. No one said the bill would force you to eat vegetables. What we are saying is that after they've shut down modern livestock farming, your only choices will be vegetable proteins, or as the bill calls for, alternative proteins. On the topic of alternative proteins, he uses a clip from my speech last spring on his pandemic bill.
Now, here's where it gets real scary. The bill suggests we should promote commercial activities that help to reduce pandemic risk, like alternative proteins. This, as I've come to learn from experts like far-right MP Cheryl Gallant, is apparently a communist code word for eating bugs.
Alternative protein is just a far-left dog whistle that means crickets. What is it with the far left and their desire to have us all eat bugs?
Of course, there are plant-based alternatives already common, which matter a lot to Canada's pulse industry. And there's cellular agriculture too, where we see products in Singapore and better industry support in the US and other countries. No one is going to force your kids to eat bugs.
As you saw, he claims no one is going to force you to eat bugs. This is typical liberal propaganda. The liberals aren't forcing you to drive less or heat your home less. They're just charging you more to drive and to heat your home. The liberals are not going to force you to eat crickets. They're just going to make it modern livestock farming so expensive that only the wealthy and well-connected people will be able to afford hamburger. I'm glad he shared a video clip from my stock because liberals are predictable. I knew back then that the liberals would try to defend this bill by claiming their critics are spreading misinformation about what's in the bill. Take a look.
This bill calls for new regulations on farming. It grants the minister the power to shut down any type of animal farming deemed high risk. Say goodbye to the chicken and pork industry in Canada. Before my Liberal colleagues begin screaming disinformation, I would encourage them to compare what Section L2 says versus Section L4. L2 calls for the regulation of commercial activities, including industrial animal farming. L4 says that any farming involving high-risk species is to be phased out. Nowhere does this bill define what a high-risk species is, but a reasonable person could assume that any species which has previously been the source of a deadly virus would be a high risk. There's a big difference between regulating risk and phasing out risk.
I know that when politicians start getting all nerdy, talking about subparagraphs and subsections, it can be a little hard to follow. The point is that he claims that the bill would not give new powers to the government to shut down farming. As you saw in the clip, I cited the exact section of the bill that does the thing he says is not in the bill. I do notice that while this far-left liberal from downtown Toronto had plenty to say about our criticism of his plan to ban farming, he was too scared to address the biggest criticism I had of his bill, namely that it promotes racist stereotypes which might blind us to the real danger we face. This bill basically pretends that the Wuhan Institute of Virology does not exist. Now, a lot of people were comfortable believing the communists' claims that the COVID virus started in a food market in Wuhan after jumping from a bat to a pangolin to a person, because it's in keeping with stereotypes about live animal food markets and the Chinese culture. For these progressive racists, the idea that China is a modern, highly educated, technologically sophisticated nation capable of advanced research on a deadly virus is something they don't want to accept, because it would mean getting serious about the threat posed by the communists who control the country. Not only is his bill completely silent about the most likely source of the deadly pandemic, whether that's a biolab leak or a biolab attack, it's basically silent on the last pandemic. Most of the bill is just typical left-wing anti-capitalist rant. Before the pandemic, they were using the climate change boogeyman to shut down modern livestock farming. Today, it's the fear of another pandemic. Tomorrow, it'll be another progressive fad. They can make as many propaganda videos as they want. It won't stop us from seeing the truth with our very own eyes. Live from Ottawa, this is Cheryl Gallant.